Good morning, everyone. It's a powerful bell. Welcome to City Club of Central Oregon. Our forum today, Groundwater Grief, River Relief, the status and future of Central Oregon's water supply. My name is Zach Boone. I am the Vice President for College Advancement and the Director of the Foundation at Central Oregon Community College, and it's my honor and privilege to serve as your City Club President for the next 12 months. Thank you. I've been a City Club member since 2010, and it's really great to look around this room and see so many longtime City Club members, first-time City Club members, or somewhere in between. So can I get a show of hands if this is your very first City Club forum? Look at that. All right. Appreciate you being here. Hopefully it's not your last. We love our newbies, so I appreciate you all being here and coming out. I also want to acknowledge two amazing City Club board members who are also both past presidents who have termed off the board, Jacob Fain and Blair Garland, as well as welcome our four new board members, Bo Eastis, Cyrus Mooney, Lisa Schloblum, and John Sorley. Can we give them all a round of applause? And actually, sorry, volunteerism matters. All our current board, could you please stand and be recognized? City Club board members, please stand. And several of them in the back standing. We see you, Carlos. Special thanks to today's forum sponsor, Central Oregon Land Watch, and to all of our sponsors, the logos of which you will see on the screen before and after our forums. I just really want to underscore how critical the support of our annual and forum sponsors are as we continue to bring relevant, timely, nonpartisan, and important conversations to you. And in that vein, when you came in, and maybe also on your table, you'll see we have City Club Challenge Campaign materials. We're finishing up a great challenge campaign this year. We're encouraging you to make a gift if you can to support City Club through the Central Oregon Gives platform. You can find more information from any of our board members, from any of our committee members, or from me directly. And listen, let's be candid, it's giving time of year, and I know there are many, many causes that are asking you for their support, including the COCC Foundation. But as we look around, and Central Oregon Land Watch, as we look around the region, we know that community conversations are as important now than ever. This is a part of why we do this work, why we give our time, our treasure, and our talent to City Club, because we must continue to invest in spaces where we can all convene, listen, learn, and talk together. I really want to thank all of you who have given to City Club, membership, forum sponsorship, who've supported the campaign or have yet to do so. We really cannot continue the conversation without you. All right, enough of that. We'll get right onto the forum today. By the way, if you're still looking for a seat, there are seats up here in front. It's a great view. Onto the forum. Today's moderator is the fantastic Emily Cureton Cook, OPB's Central Oregon Bureau Chief. Her coverage of water issues has won numerous awards, including the Regional Edward R. Murrow Award and honors from the Society for Professional Journalists for outstanding investigative and environmental reporting. Please join me in welcoming Emily Cureton Cook.
There were some fears about mic issues, so I'm just going to soften this up for a minute here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am looking around this room. I've been in this community for 6.5 years. I see a lot of very smart, very engaged people here, so I just want to thank you all for coming and also acknowledge that I am wildly intimidated by how many awesome people are here. I also want to take a minute to call out that this is the second City Club forum dealing with water issues in Central Oregon. The first forum really focused on surface water, and speaking to that incredible engagement, we have some folks in this room who are leaders from our irrigation districts, patrons from our irrigation districts, and who rely on surface water and think a lot about how water is managed here. So I want to thank you all for coming. I know of two big tables, so hopefully we'll hear from you in the Q&A section. And speaking of call-outs, I did want to just get a sense of the folks in this room who either have personal permits for water rights or manage water rights professionally. Would you throw your hand in the air? Okay, wow. So we've got some serious knowledge in here, and I just want to call that out, and also point out that question would be answered very differently if I went to a concert at the Moda Center or to Hayden Homes Amphitheater and asked that same question. The vast majority of Oregonians don't control water rights, don't necessarily think about water rights that much. So the work that we're doing here and the thinking and engagement you're doing is really important for that conversation with people who are perhaps blessed not to think about water rights very much. And before we get to our amazing panel, I also want to start by noticing and revealing a big bias that I have as a reporter. I think groundwater is pretty magical. I'm kind of obsessed with it. The idea that beneath us, out of sight, out of mind for most people, there's this whole mysterious world that mirrors and sustains everything and everyone going on the surface. That just has inspired me with so much wonder and curiosity over my years living and reporting on Central Oregon. So those are the values, that sense of wonder and of curiosity, that I try to take into the many conversations I have about water problems, water conflicts, and water solutions in our region. With that spirit, I'm very excited to lead this conversation and to welcome our panel to the stage. It includes some pretty crucial leaders about water and water policy in our region. First, Todd Heisler is a rivers advocate for Central Oregon Land Watch, and Todd brings 25 years of conservation experience to that role and a deep understanding of the challenges facing the Deschutes River system. Welcome, Todd, if you want to just come on up here and get settled. Ed Fitch is the mayor of Redmond, a city he's called home since 1979. He's served his city in many, many ways over the years, including being city attorney and a prior stint as mayor. Mayor Fitch brings a very long track record of backing policy solutions to water issues facing Central Oregon, and I want to welcome Mayor Fitch. And Bobby Bruno is here with us. It's an honor. Bobby Bruno is the CEO and Secretary-Treasurer of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. He represents the interests of the oldest water rights in the basin, and he has over 30 years' experience in natural and cultural resources. Bobby is also the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and he was previously the General Manager of the tribe's branch of natural resources. He's the board chair of the Deschutes River Conservancy and a co-chair of the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. That's a lot. Bobby does a lot. Thank you for being here. And as you may have noticed, we have a lot of information on the tables about some of the science and kind of basic concepts that underlie the hydrology and the geology of our region. I'd encourage you to take a look at those. I'm hoping that we can toss to Bobby first, and he can help understand a little bit more conversationally the extensive knowledge the Warm Springs tribes have of how water moves through the basin and where our water comes from.
Is it on?
It's on.
Okay, I can never tell. Thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for inviting me here today to be able to speak and help do some education on what the tribes and water. So starting with the watersheds. Sorry, Emily, I'm going to have to back up a little bit here before I answer that question. I need to tell you about what's important to the tribes. And water is one of the first gifts the Creator gave to the tribes. So it's something that we talk about all the time in Warm Springs. Our tribal council that I work with talks about water just about every time I meet with them, it seems like. And but this is the gift the Creator gave us, and so we're very connected to it. We're river people from the Columbia, and fish that come through those waters are very important to us. I have a lot more to say about that, but I'll leave it at that, and I'll just jump right into it, Emily, on the watersheds.
Yeah, and do you want to tell more, or I guess for me, I don't necessarily think of groundwater as important to fish or streams. Can you kind of disabuse me of that notion a little bit?
Okay, so back to the watersheds. So you know, the mountains here are collecting snow, and we're having a great snow year already this year. I've already talked to some people that have gone skiing. And we're capturing snow up in the mountains in rain. And the mountains and the meadows and that beneficially capture this water and then put it into the system and into the ground. We live in a unique area here in the Deschutes Basin where we have a lot of fractionated rock here. That USGS study, we'll be talking about that a little bit later, where the water, there's a direct connection between the surface water and the groundwater. So this water is coming from the mountains, seeping down into the system on the groundwater, and then being released as springs or right directly into the rivers. What's important for us for Warm Springs is looking at this groundwater and how important that is to the fish and our treaty rights. We have a treaty of 1855 that protects and guarantees these fish for us and comes all the way up here in making sure those treaty resources are protected. And we also have a water settlement agreement in place that's important to us to make sure we're looking out for and protecting that also. And so back to connecting that with the groundwater, we want to make sure that what's being pulled from the groundwater is not affecting these fish that are in the system or our water right that we have. We are the oldest water right in the basin, time immemorial. I'm holding this here because I wanted to point that out. It is the oldest water right, time immemorial. So if you had the treaty at the very top of this list here on these time frames, that would be Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs Treaty Right of 1855, and our water right, if you go and read it, it talks about time immemorial. And there's a story about the 1997. We won't get into that today, but I wanted to highlight that and point that out to the group today.
And how does pumping by wells affect the fish? What impacts are you seeing?
Concern with pumping from wells is, you know, what is happening to the groundwater. There's a USGS study right now that talks about the different layers of aquifers, and what we need to do is refresh that study, USGS, and have them refresh it at a tighter scale that we can understand what is actually being released or not being released. And the concerns that we have had is a cumulative effect of wells pulling water up out of the system, you know, 10 acre feet here, 100 acre feet there, and so forth, and that becomes an impact sooner or later, but where and how and what's it influencing in these different areas. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done for groundwater and refreshing the existing USGS study that we have.
And I think from my understanding of groundwater, one thing I've come to wrap my head around over the years is that it's not this like ocean of water underneath us. It's more like a river flowing underneath us. And as you're saying, water taken out one place may not flow to another place because of that. I want to turn to you, Mayor Fitch, and talk about the interests you're here to represent. How important is groundwater for the city of Redmond and Central Oregon cities in general?
Well, I don't think cities can function without water. Under our land use system, we have a requirement to have 20 years of planning and a strategy to provide water to a growing population for not only residents, but commercial, industrial. So water is, you know, if you look at the top three, water, sewer, and transportation, those are the lifeblood of city government, and they have to provide those under our state land use laws. When you look at the allocation of water in our basin, the use of all water in our basin by cities is about 2%. Yet 90% of our people live inside a city, and 85% of our economic activity is inside a city. So for us, working out future policy on how cities can be assured of getting water, perhaps in exchange for enhanced water conservation plans, I think that's the ticket for the use of water by cities in our basin, and I think it'll work.
And another one for you, and then I'd love to hear Todd's response to the same question. You were part of developing a mitigation program for the Deschutes Basin 30 some odd years ago that acknowledged this connection we're talking about and that water supplies are finite and interconnected. That mitigation program has done wonders for surface flows in the river. It has not stopped groundwater declines. Are you worried about groundwater declines?
Sure. It's a very serious issue and needs serious responses. We have a saturated aquifer that in many instances about 1,000 feet deep or more. We've seen a decline of up to 40 feet in certain areas. So it is something that we should look at carefully and plan for and make sure that we preserve this aquifer for time, as Bobby pointed out, time immemorial. We have to respect those who have rights before us. But I'll tell you, our water policy in Oregon was fashioned in 1909 under the Water Act. That was before we had airplanes and cars in multitude. We're now in the 21st century. We have to take our legal framework, our policy framework, out of the horse and buggy era and get it into the 21st century. There's going to be some give and take with that discussion, but I think it has to happen over the next few years, over the next decade. But I think there's solutions out there that we need to pursue.
And Todd, how worried are you about groundwater declines?
If you could get me to the hydrogeology slide, please. The declines are really significant, and it's a really important issue. I think we live in this paradoxical world, which, if you look at this hydrogeology slide, so the top 2,000 feet of that, the gray-blue layer is the permeable rock that the water moves through. It's not actually a rushing river, it's working through the gaps in the basalt rock. It's 2,000 feet thick. It's connected to the surface water down. You can see where it discharges into the Deschutes River. The green-brown layer is non-permeable John Day geology. So the water moves through the Deschutes layer very permeably, moves down, and then right above the Pelton Dam, they put the dam there because they get all the groundwater and the surface water, comes out there. So how is it that we can live in a world in which we have 2,000 feet of groundwater, and yet we have a groundwater problem? That's the paradox we live in. Well, if you're living in a rural area and the groundwater dropped 20 feet and you no longer get water, you got a big problem. So that's a crisis for those people. That happens to be, maybe half of 1% of our population in Deschutes County. Not that it's not important. So how do we keep that problem from getting bigger? And one of the ways we can do that is to make sure that our land use laws are being followed and that our growth is occurring in our cities where their wells are deeper and their conservation strategies and investments are more robust. And you put those two things together, and it's in fact what our state says anyways, that our growth should occur inside cities. So for the future, we need to look at our conservation practices and our groundwater pumping in cities, grow there, while we're still going to have to take care of a problem, to your point, which is very small but very crucial to a small number of people in our basin right now. And fish and wildlife, so what happens to all that water? Plentiful water. We've got 2,000 feet of water. It's already spoken for. It's in the Deschutes River downstream. There are scenic waterway flows that are regulated in the lower Deschutes. And if we take too much water up here, we will no longer have water in our scenic flows in the lower Deschutes. So it's already really spoken for, so we have to be very judicious how we in cities and other water uses use the groundwater.
And Bobby, how are the tribes and the tribal council thinking about how to focus advocacy on the groundwater issues that the tribes find most pressing? Where are you paying the most attention? What are you doing about it?
Yeah, well, we are watching development that's happening and what those effects may be on fisheries and habitat. It's very important to understand, as you just heard, some depletions happening, and that gets concerning. So how do we all work together to figure out what are we going to do for next steps to protect groundwater, but also use it in a wise manner that can benefit and balance all the needs for everybody here that we're talking with today?
I mean, 1,000 feet thick, that sounds pretty darn thick. I've been reporting for several years on home wells going dry, especially wells that were built in the 1970s and wells in the Redmond area. What do you think of just digging deeper? You know, if we have a 1,000-foot aquifer, and Mayor Fitch, you look ready to go on that one.
So there's two issues going on in terms of decline. One is climate change. Our temperatures are higher, our precipitation is lower. This year maybe be an exception. And the second one is the piping of the canals. Excuse me. That is particularly true.
Can we get some water?
Thank you.
And you're mentioning there's a USGS study that found that climate change is driving, I think it's 60 to 65% of groundwater declines, pumping 20 to 30% off the top of my head. And then the piping of canals, though, was a much smaller, like 5 to 10%.
It is, but we're anticipating a lot more piping in the future. So that will contribute to more decline. And what we have to do is make sure that everybody in the basin who draws water is regulated, metered, and accountable for the water they use. As we indicated in the little handout, there's about 20,000 exempt wells in our basin, which are allowed 15,000 gallons a day, every day of the year. And you contrast that to the cities of Bend, city of Redmond, where your per capita use is 150 to 175 gallons per day. The whole thing doesn't make any sense, but it's one of those leftovers from 40, 50 years ago that has to be addressed. We are going to have to use more water out of the aquifer, but we have to use it in a way that is the most efficient way that we can. The real issue here, in my mind, in the Deschutes Basin, is the surface water use by irrigation districts. It's inefficient, it needs a lot of work to do, and to put more water back in the river to enhance the river flows, to enhance the fisheries, et cetera. But on groundwater, we have to have everybody participating in conservation, including those inside the city and those outside the city. And we need to address how we use the water the most efficiently as possible so that we protect the resource we have. Cities of Bend and Redmond also are recharging the aquifer of over 3 billion gallons a year. There's more to do, a lot more to do, but I think we're on the right track.
And I just want to jump in. When you talk about exempt wells, most people here probably know this, but homes, rural homes, livestock wells don't actually need a certificated water right, and they can have a big impact over a great area. Todd, before we turn to some of the more collaboration-minded topics that you're bringing up, what's your response to this idea of like, well, let's dig deeper. It's just a question of money.
Well, if you're one of those 20,000 wells on a rural property, you can't afford to dig deeper. And so again, the people who are affected are a very small number of people right now, but they are the tip of the iceberg. So it's not really something that we should be thinking about. I mean, just digging deeper, of course, is one solution. But I think the other solution is to look. When those homes were built and those wells were dug, nobody really thought about this issue. It's kind of like people who approved homes in the floodplains when they hadn't been a flood in 50 years. Nobody thought about it. And then floods come through and said, that's not a very good place to build a home. Well, I think that's how we have to look at growth and development in Central Oregon today. Is there's just places that we shouldn't be building homes and shouldn't be digging wells to start with. And so hindsight can now be 20/20, and we can go forward with a development strategy that makes more sense when working with water management. And I think that's probably one of the ways to work ourselves long-term out of this problem.
And Bobby, you mentioned the need for more studies to look at localized area in the basin and where water goes in and where it's going out or not going out if it's being pumped. Are there areas that the tribes have already studied or are most concerned with focusing those study efforts, case studies, if you will?
No.
No, you're very diplomatic.
I do want to talk about drilling deeper.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean? What does that look like? And you asked the question about having more studies and understanding the groundwater. What do we know about drilling deeper beyond what we see up on the slides up here? I don't know what that means. And what that looks like into the future. It makes me think about the Cureton and the issues they're having in the basin next door to us. I think there's a lot to think about still.
And those issues, are you talking about like when you draw down the groundwater at a certain point, it will no longer discharge to natural springs. It's cut off from its drains to rivers, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. Bobby, do you think there's enough water to go around for people to share it without anybody coming away feeling unwhole here in the basin?
Depends on what the creator's going to give us each year. We have a good snowpack this year, and when there's good snowpack and a lot of moisture, it's easily shared around with everyone. The tough years are the drought years. And what do you do during the drought times in trying to distribute this water and be equitable to everyone in balancing that need for the entire basin here? That's where our challenges are most of the time. The reason we're talking about a lot of this right now is because we've been in drought. And what's going to happen with climate change, which is another discussion I have with our tribal council and just had yesterday. What does that mean out in the future, and what's that going to look like for our basin and our snowpack? And what type of moisture are we going to get in? Is it going to be more rain than snow? We still have a lot of questions. I think all of us still have a lot of work to do.
And with all that uncertainty, how can we be good neighbors in the meantime?
That's one of the tribe's policies, being good neighbors, because our neighbors are always going to be here forever, and we're always going to be here forever. So how do we work together and come up with solutions? And I think we have a good start on that with this basin compared to other basins. We have the DRC, Deschutes River Conservancy, which is a group that the tribes helped start back in 1996. We have the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative, which is the entire basin. Right now it's been focused mainly on the upper basin here. But there's a lot of folks sitting at the table trying to come up with solutions and ideas and being good neighbors with each other and trying to figure this complex issue out.
And my groundwater nerdiness has gotten the best of me again. I want to get, for the part of our panel here before we turn to a QA, to the news peg, if you will, for why we're having this conversation now.
So I think at fundamental, we're going to have to change our legal structure and our policy on water law. Since 120 years ago, it's been first in right, first in time. And, that worked when we had a very limited population, a very rural population, and we had a lot of precipitation, a lot of recharge of the aquifer, of the river. But it's not, we're in a whole different environment, both socially, as we're being basically compressed into the cities. We're in a totally different environment with climate change. And so the underpinnings of our water law and our water policy are going to have to adapt to this new environment. And there's going to have to be called a value-based component to water law. What are our values today in terms of how we should use water? Should it still be first in time, or should we have a different policy to recognize a whole different environment? I think that's going to be the challenge for this basin. I think it's going to be the challenge for the state over the coming legislative sessions over the next few years.
And Oregon water regulators have started taking a much more conservative approach to groundwater. They've drafted new rules statewide that changes how they assess what happens when people want to dig a new well. And in this basin, They have started denying some permits for wells because they found the Deschutes aquifer doesn't have the capacity, or that new uses could harm the public. How closely are you watching this, and do you agree with this more conservative approach as a move in the right direction?
I think the water resources had to do something because of declining aquifer levels. Other aquifers are much worse shape than ours is, particularly Howney, Umatilla. And what we disagreed with water resources was having one rule that applied to every basin regardless of their differences socially, geology, et cetera. So there's work to do to refine that, to find a path forward, and I think it's going to take some time. I think what we've done as a basin in terms of our Deschutes mitigation program, where we took surface water, put it back in the river to improve river flows in exchange for groundwater, has been very helpful to the river. We need to refine that maybe more with better conservation methods. But the rule that was adopted, I think, has some problems with it because it was one size fits all, and that's not the right way to go.
Todd, do you have thoughts on we're talking about the new groundwater rules and how they affect the Deschutes Basin?
Yeah, I think it's great that the state stepped up really for the first time and said, enough's enough. Let's look at this resource. It's declining. Let's regulate it. And so I think it's great. It's never perfect. The one size fits all. There's always outliers. There's always problems with any rulemaking that comes out. But I think overall, I applaud the state for taking this kind of an approach. I just wish they would do that with surface water. I completely agree with what Ed said about reform of our prior appropriation and our priority system. Because if you have a very senior water right, you have no incentive to conserve. If you have a very junior water right, like North Unit farmers, you have a huge incentive to conserve. We shouldn't have those incentives based on when you arrived and when you got a water right. We should have those apply unilaterally to all water users. And when we do that, to answer your question, there will be plenty of water in our basin for decades to come.
And Bobby, as somebody representing the most senior water rights in the basin, how do you feel about this suggestion that first in time, first in right isn't working on its own?
It's the reality that we live in right now. And to see that change anytime soon is, at least for me personally, is hard to see when that might happen.
It seems like it would be a bit of a political third rail, no offense, Mayor Fitch. I mean, how, you seem like an optimist, though.
Reality seems to set in over time with legislators, and we are in a different reality. And actually, there's a water caucus at the legislature led by Representatives Helms and Owens. I think they're recognizing the new reality. They're coming up with a lot of ideas on how to address it. And this will take time. It might take 5 to 10 years to have I'll call it seismic shift in how we deal with water from a legal perspective, from a statutory perspective. But to me, it's inevitable because we have the new reality.
And I want to leave some time for questions from this very smart room. We have 2 mics floating around the room. If you have a question, anyone? There's one there.
So thank you for your insights. What I'm curious about is there seems to be no real spine on the part of our legislators to really, get into dealing with the issues that you gentlemen are bringing up today. The water rights issues in particular. It's easier to nibble around the edges with the conservation. Meanwhile, maybe not the right term, but unbridled growth continues to happen in Central Oregon. So when or what's it gonna take for the legislature to really grapple with the issue? Because they give up a lot of political capital in doing that. That's obviously why they're not doing it. But what's it going to take? Will it be a public outcry forcing them to take action?
I hope I didn't give the impression that this is going to be simple or easy. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. There's a lot of experts in here. Josh Newton is here, and Josh Wedding is here, who know a hell of a lot more water than I do. But I do know that when you look at the stream of history, when a new environment comes into play, and it takes a while to recognize it, how long has it taken for people to recognize climate change? When that happens, people will look for solutions to figure out, like Bobby said, how do we equitably share the water resource that we have in this day and age, which is completely different than the day and age where our water law started. I think it'll happen, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of pressure on the legislature, but I do anticipate it'll happen within the next 10 years.
It'll be a crisis.
Amy, I see a woman in the, oh, there we go.
Patrick Howard, you talked a little bit about unregistered or unmetered water use. And could you say a little bit more of what form that takes and what maybe percentage of the groundwater is used in that form?
It's hard to say because they are unmetered. But if you just look at what's authorized, you take 20,000 wells at 15,000 gallons a day every day of the year. That's 90 billion gallons. That's what's authorized. We don't even know how much it's taken. Compare that to all the cities in Central Oregon. Our usage is less than 9 billion gallons a year. So it's just an issue that has to get addressed, and I think there's a recognition it has to get addressed.
First off, thank you for all the information. To kind of piggyback on the point that gentleman made with his question about the continued growth in Central Oregon, for a while there, I haven't heard it in the media and recently, but there was talk about that new resort going in and the land and stuff north of here, east of Redmond. And I'm curious, not specifically about that particular golf resort, but resorts in general, what is their impact on groundwater and water usage here in Central Oregon? It's just a part that I am not familiar with to that extent.
Well, the resort is Thornburg, and it just had a week-long trial in the circuit court between Thornburg and Water Resources. So I'll be interested to see how that decision comes out. But Bobby, you may have some comments. Okay.
So it depends. And I think what Bobby was saying is we need more analysis at a more granular level. But we suspect that depending on where the resort is, and that one happens to be in a very bad place for springs and middle chutes. So it's kind of, it depends where they are as to how bad the effect is on the river.
Just wondering if we could get some, this has always been a question I've had because my grandpa used to be very passionate about this issue, but he also used to say that like, oh, the forests are all overgrown nowadays. There's all these invasive species that are in here and they're sucking up all the water, and I never knew if that was just him being him or if that's like actually part of the issue. And I'm wondering is that part of the issue, and is there that part of the potential solution? Like, because we live in a fire-adapted climate, but we haven't had fires here for, or at least we do, but just not how they should. Just wondering.
So we have a lot less fire on the landscape, and we have a lot of areas that are seriously overgrown with juniper that is a water hog. Now, will thinning all the junipers in Deschutes County solve the water problem? No. But is judicious use of that tool in specific places where there are springs or creeks make sense on particular ranches? Yes. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but you know, it's really that we've let the juniper just grow without fire.
Hey there. My name's Erica, and I just really appreciate all these brilliant water brains in here today. I am not one of them, and I will be asking probably a really, basic question, but the themes and the concepts I see repeated over and over between parenting, dealing with screen times, greenwashing, and recycling, and a lot of similar issues that we grapple with as a community. It seems to be one and the same, where there are laws and rules that are in place that don't make sense. Use it or lose it, right? You've got this right to use this water, and if you don't use it, then. So there are a lot of things that happen with the legal systems that take a really long time. And we know that, I don't know, for me it looks a lot like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So what I find really frustrating as one person with no time is my impotence, my inability to affect big change. And I see large pockets making big differences in rules, regulations, policies, and from the little person's perspective, what I am continually looking for is a cohesive, coordinated effort that gets us out of silos and allows us to amplify our visibility and our education of the public and bring access to policy change, to collective, to all the little people. So I appreciate City Clubs facilitating this, and I'm wondering if you can each, I know there are all these different organizations, but I'd really like to know, how do we, as little people, get coordinated to affect these big, big policy changes that will not happen if financial gains by big pockets are not countered effectively?
Well, each person can actually help in their own way of conserving water, in your own household, in your yards. That's all. You take 150,000 people we have in cities in Deschutes County. They can make a difference day in, day out with better use of water. On the big policy issues, it's going to take a joint effort by a lot of people, a lot of organizations to affect that change, and everybody can help on that.
Actually, I want to pause here just for a minute. Bobby, what do you hope people take away from this if they're not in positions of power from this conversation?
Yeah, that was a good question. And it's, there's a lot of information out there on water that the public has access to from the irrigation districts and the cities that are putting out information on what they're doing and how to conserve water. But there's also organizations that we talked about earlier, like the Deschutes River Conservancy has a lot of information. You can get onto their site and glean a lot of information. You could be part of the Deschutes Basin Water Collaborative. Anybody can be part of that, private citizens, and be there and learn more about it and be able to help with. Those are some of the things that group talks about is what are some of the solutions, what are some of the things you can do with legislative concepts in forwarding, equitable water in our basin.
My name is Frank Turek. I'm a geologist. I worked with water for 30 years in the central Arizona area. And what I suggest to the group is if you want to know what can be done, go online and look at the 1980 Groundwater Act in Arizona. It discusses and how to regulate exempt wells, agricultural wells, municipal wells, water use, agricultural water use, how the state is divided into basins for management of specific basins. What we're talking about now, I was working with 40 years ago in Arizona. And so I suggest you folks go online, and if you want to know what can be done, look at that. The naysayers, one of the key things is you have, in an urban area, you have to have a 100-year water supply to get a development permit, okay? And the naysayers said, this will kill all the development in Arizona. Does anybody here think that Phoenix is not developing? It did not have any kind of impact what the naysayers said. So what can be done? Look to Arizona, what can be done and what was done.
Let's take one more question from the audience and then give our panel a chance to give us some final thoughts. Is there any more questions out there?
Yeah, I was just wondering, when it comes to lawns, you drive around, you see like a lot of lawns that are made from grasses that are like really water hungry, especially for a climate like this. Is there like legislation into like asking people to xeriscape and look for turf grasses that are more drought resistant, or maybe even incentives to convert turf grass lawns to like native flowers and forbs and grasses?
There is a law which allows each city and the county commission and the governor to suspend, for example, CCNRs which require lawns. That's a tool that's out there. We plan on having a water conservation summit next spring with our homeowner associations and landscapers to see what we can do to foster more xeriscaping and less lawns. It's tough because those were done, you know, like 30, 40 years ago. They're aesthetically pleasing in a lot of ways, but in other respects, their time has come and gone.
Oh, I see a hand in the back, actually, that I did want to hear from. We have Craig Hurrell from the Central Oregon Irrigation District, who's very inconveniently located to the microphone right now. So, but Craig is Executive Director of also the Deschutes Basin Board of Control and an important voice for irrigation districts in the basin. I threatened to call on him, and then he hid way back there, so I'm glad you waved me down.
With purpose. I hide from Todd
Yeah.
all the time. No, I just want to say that as the voice for the surface water, it's really important to have these discussions and how they're interconnected. The farmers really are stuck with an issue, and it's an ESA listed species that we had to deal with. Fastest way to get water in river is piping large canals. You know, we have over 1,000 miles of canals that we're looking at piping. We've piped probably close to maybe 50 miles of canals. The real impact is when we take water off surface areas and you no longer have 4 feet of water on an urbanized area. So that is an impact to groundwater as well. It is very important to realize we've chose to get back to the river to meet the needs of a species, but it doesn't mean that we aren't working collaboratively with all partners. And you know, Bobby and I have had this talk, how can we generate this water? Because we know we're picking today where this water is most and best use, but tomorrow it could be different. So we are collaboratively working all the time. We don't always agree, but we're at the table. The question about law, the reason that we choose to be at the table is so we aren't in years of litigation, and it is slower than most people want, but in the 11 years I've been here, we've made huge strides, huge strides.
Thank you, Craig. And to sort of send us off into our days, I'm curious to hear from each of you, what is an area where you see the most opportunity to collaborate and work with people who you may not agree with even on water management issues?
Okay, well, I think we all agree that water is a scarce resource and it should be used wisely and as efficiently as we possibly can. But I think, would everybody agree to that? Is that fair? Okay. So, devil's in the details then. How do we make sure with our cities, with our irrigation districts, with our exempt wells, with all of these things we've talked about, how do policies come into effect that have us and give us the proper incentives to using water as efficient as we can? We can do it through pricing, we can do it through regulation, a lot of tools we can use to get to higher efficiencies, but one way or the other, that's where we need to go.
Ditto. Yeah, a lot of it's common sense. We can do a lot more inside the cities on conservation. There's no question about it. Exempt wells have to be regulated and metered, and their allowable gallons per day probably has to be lowered significantly. We need to work with the agricultural districts. Every time they put water in the river, or we take water and put it in the river from surface water, they lose revenue, and that's another issue. So it's going to have to be a balancing act to make sure that we sustain our agricultural community. But there's no question that we can't take water like we did before, and we have to do it better, a lot better than we have.
I'm sitting here thinking about and looking at the crowd here and thinking about the work I've done over the years across the entire state of Oregon and also in other states, because our treaty rights go into other states, and thinking about water in this state and this basin. And I don't know if everyone here understands that we are very fortunate to live in the basin that we live in with the amount of water that we do have. We have the opportunity to balance this and make this work for folks. Comparative to other places in Oregon that don't have the water like we have, don't have the opportunities, don't have the collaborative groups that are sitting there working together hand in hand and trying to come up with solutions with these big challenges that we have. We are very fortunate to be living where we live and working together. And we are looked at as a model for other basins in Oregon and other states on how we work together in trying to come up with these solutions for water in our basin. So that's my thoughts on that.
Well, I hope you all join me in giving a big thank you to our panelists. Bobby Bruno is the CEO and Secretary-Treasurer of the Warm Springs Tribes, Mayor Ed Fitch of Redmond, and Todd Heisler, Rivers Advocate from Central Oregon Landwatch. We do not need to sit up here awkwardly while I hand this back over to Amber Thatcher, the Interim City Club Executive Director. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As Emily mentioned, I am the Interim Executive Director of City Club. It's nice to put some faces with emails and phone calls and lots of reminders that you get from me about everything. So good to see everybody. I want to thank Emily again for a great job leading us in this discussion today, and also our panelists for their insights on this important topic. So let's give them another round of applause. I also want to thank the forum planning team, Heather Martin, Janet Greger, Erin Switzer, Daisy Lehman, and our forum coordinator, Quinn Rose, for all your work in putting this forum together. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of conversations from from an idea to what it is today. So thank you all for your hard work in that, and we appreciate you bringing this important topic to our community. Thank you again to our sponsor, Central Oregon Landwatch. We really appreciate your support of City Club. We couldn't do it without our sponsors. Thank you also to the Deschutes River Conservancy for proposing this topic to us. As you all know, it won the Members' Choice Forum vote this year, and based on the turnout today and all the phone calls I got this morning asking if there was still room, it's obviously something that's front of mind for everybody and is important in our region. So thank you to them. If you're interested in continuing the conversation, the Deschutes River Conservancy is holding a seminar as part of their Raise the Deschutes series called Beneath the Surface, Navigating Oregon's New Groundwater Rules and Their Impact in Central Oregon on December 16th. There's also some handouts as you're leaving if you want to have some more information about water in the area. City Club has a pretty busy couple months ahead. We're coming out of a busy couple months. Our next forum is in 2 weeks, which yay. The Future of Mount Bachelor Forum is on Thursday, December 5th at 8 a.m., so it's a different time than probably most of you are used to, but we'll be at COCC. We have a great lineup of both local and national experts to come speak about the current trends in the ski area, or in the ski industry, and what the sale of Mount Bachelor could mean for our community. So it should be pretty informative, and we're just keeping our fingers crossed. It's not a powder day, so all you skiers out there aren't drawn to the mountain, and you come have this conversation with us. Then on January 16th, we'll be back here at the UU for a lunchtime forum looking at the changing business of healthcare and the impact these changes have and could have in Central Oregon for a firm called Vital Signs is their CEO at your bedside. So get ready for that. You can register for both on the website, as you know. And as Zach mentioned, don't forget we're part of this year's Central Oregon Gives campaign. It's week 3, free sub at Port of Subs if anybody needs a second lunch. So as you're planning your year in giving, please consider supporting City Club. We really couldn't do what we do without your support. So thank you all for attending today. We look forward to seeing you at another forum and wish you all a happy holiday season.